some of you have covered these. Now, because you don't have a calculator, I like to do these questions like this. So the first thing I do is subtract 6 and I get 4. Now, instead of finding out that x is 4/5, which a lot of you do because you've been trained since you were 2 years old to find x and plug it in. That's what they teach you to do in every geometry class and every algebra class and blah blah blah. Well, the relationship I see is to double both sides and get 8, and then add 3 to both sides, and then I get 11. So I get 10x plus 3 equals 11, and so that's my answer. Now, that strategy, you might say, oh, I don't like that strategy. I don't want to use that. I'll just figure out that it's 4/5, and then I'll come over here and plug in 4/5, and then multiply, and I see that 5 goes into 10 twice, and then I have 2 times 4 plus 3. It works too. So there's nothing wrong with that strategy at all. Sometimes I will say that it's faster not to find x. In this case, it's probably, no different either way. Okay, so how many, did you just plug in answers? Or did you actually went through you multiplied this one by 2 and got 2x, 2y, and 0, and then added them together and got 5x equals 10, and then found out that x was 2, and then you noticed that only one of them had an x value of 2. Is that what you did?
Mm-hmm.
It works. It works. So you could do elimination. Several of you like to, on those particular questions, will start plugging in values to see. It couldn't possibly be the letter A because the very first equation says that the two numbers have to add up to 0. So you could at least get rid of that choice and also that choice because they don't add up to 0. So it really was down to B and C if you were doing a plug and chug method. Question 3. So what does the number 12 mean in this situation? 12 is obviously connected to something that changes. So what did you guys say it was? Any thoughts? Come on.
This one I thought it was a...
You are correct. $12 per hour for each landscaper. So since N is the number of landscapers and H is the total number of hours they worked, we have to be able to figure out how much money that we had to pay all of the landscapers. So we needed to know how much money they each made. So good. Question 4. I was working with one of you, and what I tried to get you to do was focus on just even the first, okay? If you take something to the 4th power, right? So, I'm never going to write this out in reality. And maybe I should just worry about doing the firsts and not worry about the other part. If you're doing this, or if you at least think through this, 9a times 9a times 9a, you end up with a much bigger value than 9a to the 4th. Now, you would get a to the 4th, but you would not get 9a to the 4th. 81 squared. 81 squared. Is that 6561? I believe it is. But, yep, I got it. 6561. So, too big. So, by process of elimination, just looking at this and raising it to that power, you should be able to say, oh, that's 81a to the 4th. 3 times 3 times 3 times 3 times 3, that's going to be 81a to the 4th. And so there's only one where you take the 3a squared, and when you square it, you end up with 9a to the 4th. So you wouldn't have to do all the foiling. You could just look at the first only. Sometimes I'll use the last or something like that. I don't necessarily need to do all the foiling to kind of rule out the bad choices. And yes, anybody have any better idea, like taking a square root? Some of you might do something like that on the ends, and that would give you these two values right here. That would depend on whether you knew you were dealing with a perfect square. but it is definitely a strategy. Stop me if I go too fast through something. So or circle that problem, and when we get back into time where we're working, where you're working on your own, if you want me to go back to a question, I'll be happy to go back to it and help you. So if k is greater than 0 and x equals 7, all right, so let's see here. X is, so 2k squared plus 17, take the square root, minus 7 equals 0, so hopefully you pushed that to the other side. And by the way, we are recording all this stuff, and now I'm not recording the individual parts where you and I are going over it, although maybe I should. I want to record. I don't want you to feel like you're embarrassed, like you can't ask me a question. So that's why I don't typically record stuff where it's just you and me one-on-one conversation. So squared both sides, subtracted 17, that's 32. Divide by 2, and I find out that k squared is equal to 16. How come the answer is not negative 4?
It has to be greater than 0.
Good. They told me that k has to be greater than 0. Now, I know the other reason you could tell me is, Mr. Stailey, it's multiple choice. Negative 4 isn't even listed. Well, I understand that, but in the non-multiple choice, you might run into that same thing, and they always do this kind of stuff where they tell you information to rule out bad choices. So you got to pay attention to that information. Several of you asked me about this question, and several of you we concluded that you ended up with doing that stepping process twice and getting a p-value of 10. So many of you got that one right when we did it together. Yeah, that was a popular question. Question 7. I did this with one person, so we should subtract those. This is usually a question that a lot of people have. Now, did you guys see this information right here, a plus b and a minus b? When you see that information, what does that make you think of? Does anybody think of factoring? Because don't tell me they all have their microphones muted. They better not all have their mic. Oh, 3 of them do. Now, is there a reason you have your microphones muted? Like, is there like a huge amount of noise in the background that you are preventing us from hearing because your dog is barking? Or
mostly just loud family.
Loud family. Hey, I understand that. I do. I get it. I lock myself in a cave, usually in the morning at 7:45 when none of you wants to get up, and I'm teaching class. I'm in my minivan. Yes, I'm in the minivan of my garage because it's the quietest place in my house. And I don't have a really big house, so everybody else that might be sleeping because they get up at like 9 o'clock or 8:30 or 8 o'clock, depending on the day. Anyway, I just don't want to bother them. And I'm sure you understand that on days where you don't have something right away. A squared minus b squared, that's equal to 16. When you're dividing like bases, you subtract the exponents. So what I'm hoping that you see is that's a difference of perfect squares, and it can be factored. And they already gave me that a plus b is equal to 2. So a little bit of division shows me that a minus b has to be equal to 8. Did I lose anybody in that process? If I did, let me know. This would be a good time to let me know if I went too fast through something. Because typically a lot of people ask that question.